All right, I'm going to start recording.
But I toured in that show for 22 years.
You worked on that show for 22 years?
I toured internationally in that show for 22 years. It was kind of where I made most of my money. I was pretty sick of it by the end, I got to tell you. I was really sick. But it kind of grew with me. I mean, it was good material, but
yeah.
Boy, when I retired that, I was so happy to retire it.
I can imagine. Wait, hold on. Let me put on a sweater because I'm cold. I haven't done anything for 20 years.
I know. You weren't even born 20 years ago, right?
I definitely was born. I was graduating from high school. That's something at least.
You look very young.
Thank you. I get that a lot.
You know what? I think it has to do with doing what we love. That is my feeling about that, is that keeps us young. Theater people are astoundingly young. And even when they really look wrinkled and everything like I do now, you talk to them and they're like, oh my God, this person forgot to grow up. In a good way, not the Michael Jackson.
In a very good way. Yeah, I'm actually, I got myself back on stage for the first time basically since high school, really, or since college. And I was cast, I'm 37, and I was cast as a woman who's like 30, 31. And everyone in my cast assumed that I'm like actually playing someone who's older than me, which is very bizarre. But it's cool. Like, I was like, if I have young energy, I'm happy to take that and run with it and do whatever I can with it. I don't mind. I also am not a person who's afraid of getting older. So I don't necessarily take it like as a compliment when people are like, oh, you look so young. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, I got to tell you, they don't tell you this, but the 60 is the best. I think 70, the health issues start, and that's a whole other thing. But 60s, I'm loving it. I'm loving every second of them.
That's amazing.
But I'm not poor. Yes, being poor and aging is horrible.
It's very difficult. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just think about how much better I am today than I was when I thought I was like cooked and done and, graduating from college, and just what a better person I am today. And I'm so excited for what I'm going to be like in 20 more years, or like in 30
I think
more
this project that you're doing is really critically important. Women have a great deal of difficulty giving ourselves permission to be artists. It seems very selfish. And if you are an artist, and I think it's something you're born with, and you don't make it a priority, you will just have all kinds of mental and physical problems. I mean, you can't just decide, well, I'm just not going to breathe oxygen today because that's, going to slow me down. It's like and I think really, it seems like you're giving people permission.
Thank you.
And, so many women, and one of the little stories I was going to tell, I mean, permission is really important. And I think that this subject is I mean, and the worst thing, many things are happening on our planet, but the colonization of our imaginations is, it's like, there's enough of us to change this shit.
Yeah.
It's the colonization of the imagination. I just, I can't imagine anything, that's what I love about this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yes.
She's just like, well, this doesn't make sense. Let's change it. It's like, where did you ever get that idea from?
Yeah.
I just feel like her imagination is not colonized. She has an idea. It's like, let's go for it. Yeah. And everybody else, it hasn't been done before. Or I think you're going to need to ask the men for some permission to do, and I just see that, and I hope.
Or you need to go back to school and get another degree before you can do that, or whatever.
Yes, exactly. No, I think your project is right on the money, I got to say.
Thank you so much. I love it. I just find that women, especially artists, and especially women in theater, because theater is such a beautiful 360-degree art form, we know how to design really beautiful lives, but we're not applying the skills we have within the theater to the lives that we're living every day. And so I feel like my mission is
preach it. Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. It's like we should probably start taping, but
I'm already taping. I'm on it.
Oh, okay. Are we doing it now?
Yeah, I mean, might as well. We'll see where this fits, and I may cut some stuff.
Okay. Well, let me just tell you that I found that in a lot of my plays, and I started writing in 1986, that it's like a shopping cart with a bad wheel. I was trying to write a very, not just centering women, but centering lesbians. And that's a whole other thing in patriarchy, because we give other women priority in, our domestic and our sexual life is with women. And that is, that is not, but so I would try and center myself, my community in the narrative. And I would just, let me get rid of this email thing. I just found that what was happening was that, it like the bad wheel that I just kept steering into traditional heteropatriarchal narrative forms, and I would just have to kind of wrench it back. And I remember I was doing a play about Esther and Vashti, which is a biblical subject, and I was, I think of the play Job or Joseph and the whatever, Godspell. I thought it's time that, a lesbian feminist take the Bible and do some
and run with it.
I had the hardest time. I know all about, you have these courageous women and they end up martyred, or whatever. I honestly, I found I was almost incapable of getting this thing to a positive women on top ending, because I just had such entrenched ideas of you're outnumbered. It's men, for God's sake. They'll stop at nothing, blah, blah. And I just remember I had to really work, because I'd never seen any narrative anywhere that did what I needed that third act to do in Esther and Vashti. And I ended up with a narrative that was very radical, and that turns into a communal healing of women who are survivors of war. I'm talking about the war of men against women, inviting members of the audience up on stage, and it seamlessly morphs into a community healing about female survivors of male sexual violence. That's within it's not like, Hair, where the play falls apart and everybody comes up, takes their clothes off and dances. I say it stays in the play. You're coming into the biblical narrative. And rewriting the whole thing. But that was so hard for me, because my imagination was colonized. I kept running into walls. Oh, you can't say that, or how would that happen, or could women do that? I was like, so
well, so many of us are. I kind of the metaphor that's coming to my mind is that we're born with. I believe that we're born with the work that we should be doing in our DNA. I think that we are born with many possibilities, and we start to choose one of them and we do it, and that's how we're born. But we're born open other than that. And then as we grow up and as we move through socialization, we get these stories carved into our bones until there's very little room left for a new story, or those are just the stories that we believe in and then we continue to retell. And so I think what you're doing is not only incredibly difficult, but also very brave and so important and so powerful, because we need those new stories. We need new stories carved into our bones so we can continue to recreate the world, right? Because our stories that we tell are the reality that we have. So thank you for your work. That was a long way of saying that, basically.
Yeah.
So let me jump into, there were two things that you said in the video I was watching of you that's on YouTube. There were a couple things that you said that I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I wanted to first talk about, and you said this was a thing from 20 years ago, which is amazing, but I'm going to pull it back up. And if it doesn't still feel true, let me know. But if it does, I just want to.
Well, I wrote the play in '86, so it's 33 years old.
Amazing.
But, and then around 90, I think I started touring in it, and I toured until about 5 years ago. Wow. I think when I was 55 or almost 60, and I was still playing a 19-year-old, it was like, you know what?
So what is the complete title of the play for listeners who aren't familiar?
It's The Second Coming of Joan of Arc. And I actually, It started out, it was very radical. It was 86. I was doing it in church basements and people's living rooms. And, you know, it was underground, you know, the freedom fighting women up in the hills type of thing. I got an off-Broadway, not off, but an off-Broadway offer this year on this play. It's over 30 years old. And I thought, wow, you know, it's just because, you know, just that it would go mainstream. If somebody had said in 86, this is going to go off Broadway, I would be like, oh, no, the men will never allow that. But my producer, he said, the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
That's the watershed. It's like, it's not that women hadn't been raped and weren't angry. They just hadn't given each other permission to have a movement around it. And now it's a mainstream play. So
absolutely. So let me set the scene really quickly. This video, which I highly recommend people check out, it's on YouTube. The title is Engaged, which is your last name. And it's you and you're spreading mud or like dirt on your face and on your body. You're in what is clearly just a public restroom. There's like stalls behind you. And you're just riffing on your thoughts. And one of the things you said, and I hope I get this quote correctly, you say, many women are suffering terribly because they don't know they're artists. And they don't know they're artists because they don't know they're lesbians. So what comes up for me with that is, I mean, there's so much there. There's so much identity there. There's so much power there. There's so many layers there. And I was wondering if you can talk just a little bit about what it was like to peel back those layers to find the artist that you are inside, because you have an incredible story.
Well, it's a little bit of a different story than younger people, because I was born in 52 and I never saw a lesbian, and I might have vaguely known what they were, kind of in dark alleys with leather jackets, but I never had curiosity about it. They were characters in an underworld, and I was a middle-class kid, really until, you know, the 70s. And by then I was kind of in young adulthood. Mm-hmm. So that's a very different thing. And in my story, I was about 33, and I think I was going to be a teacher or something. I didn't know I was an artist. And I began to have memories of child sexual abuse. And some people, you know, are aware all along. And I apparently was just filing it in the amnesia file, like I'll deal with this later or maybe never. And I was very focused on surviving. So I got married at 19 to a very nice man. And you know, it was like, look, I'm rocking it. I'm being normal. Look, normal. I'm going to live. And that's kind of exciting through your 20s. But if you're a survivor of child sexual abuse or adverse childhood experiences, that thing that kind of got you out of the home starts to break down around your late 20s and early 30s. It's kind of like a rocket stage. I got out of the orbital of the perpetrators. But then that stage of the rocket falls away. And for me, the A student, and what is a normal person supposed to do? Watch me, I'm going to go out and do it. Because I had acting chops. It's like, oh, I can do this. And it became, the next survival question is, yeah, but who am I? All right, I get it. I'm alive. I'm here. I know how to get a job. I know how to, you know, and that isn't good enough anymore. I want my own life, but I got to figure who I am. So I got my memories, and that just all hell broke loose. I completely estranged from my family. And at the same time, I let myself suddenly know what I felt about men's bodies, which is, ew. And I could not let myself do that as long as I felt like I was going to have to be physically intimate with them as part of my survival, part of the look at me being normal thing. So I think, you know, I could only reclaim my history when I was strong enough to know I could live without men. All those pieces just come together, but suddenly it was time. Let myself know what I know about men. It's like we're breaking up a little bit. Are you having trouble hearing me?
No, I can hear you fine. Let me take one pause really quick to switch over to my other internet. I live in a very rural area, and sometimes our internet breaks up.
I thought it was me. I might have. so I thought it was me.
Okay, nope, it's probably me. So I just switched over to my better internet. We should be
All
good.
right, good.
Okay, carry
All
on.
right, so anyway, at 33, I get my memories. I know what I know, I feel about men, and I realize I will never be intimate with another man again, ever. And that kind of made me a lesbian. My sexuality was extremely muted by then. I had never owned my own body or inhabited it. So to have desire for women, some people know they're lesbian at 3. I just wanted whatever was normal. So for me, realizing what I really felt and thought about things, it's kind of like going through adolescence at 33. It wasn't pretty, let me tell you. It's not pretty at 16, but at 33, it's very odd. And also I realized I was an artist, and that no matter what it cost me, that was going to be my primary activity for the rest of my life, because suddenly I knew my story. I knew the community I was writing for, lesbians, feminists, and I also knew what my story was. It was a story of a survivor. And so all 3 of those threads couldn't have pulled any one without the other 2. Couldn't have been an artist unless I knew I was a lesbian, a survivor. Couldn't have come out as lesbian until I really dealt with the survivor piece, and the art was going to see me through and give me my purpose. They all happened at once. And I think that, well, you asked me about, you don't know you're an artist until you can figure out you're a lesbian, for a lot of women, because they don't know, when you make art, you have to have a vision of who you are and also your traditions and whatever. So if you don't know what your community is, if you're utterly colonized, you're never going to be very good doing colonial art, because it's not really yours. The colonizers make great colonial art because that's what they do. But, and I think that a lot of women don't know they're lesbians because they don't know their histories. I don't think I'm unique in misremembering or forgetting altogether my childhood. I think that's so true. The brain is a marvelous thing, and if you're really small and it's a really frightening situation, it will just take care of that. I was editing my life as it rolled. Okay, throw that out. That never happened. Oh, she didn't say that. I didn't see that, and bless its little heart, it kept me alive, but then it also was going to keep me from having an adult life because I didn't know who I was.
Yeah. And you had mentioned, one of the reasons I was so excited to speak with you is you mentioned something when I made a Facebook post saying, I'm starting this podcast. I'm looking for people who want to talk about what theater has done in their lives. And you're one of, I think at this point, you were the only person who's used this phrase, but I think this is a phrase that many, many people resonate with, which is, you said theater saved your life.
Oh yeah. Oh,
and I think that is maybe not a completely universal sentiment, but I hear that often. I work a lot with high school kids, and high school kids,
yes.
They're hyperbole is their thing, but I think it's really true that theater
and it continues to save my life. It continues.
Yeah. So talk about that.
Well, I think it started very early. Somebody said by the age 5, you pretty much have your mission, your themes. And so for me, when I was very small, I took to dolls. And don't get me on a soapbox about people who think that dolls are anti-feminist. Oh my God, I had a collection of 50, and I had a dollhouse my cousins had built for me that was about 4 feet high. These were big dolls. And I would script these BBC miniseries. There was a castle. I mean, the relationships between these characters, and the servants had as much status as the royalty, everybody. And there's lots of people having sex, of course, because, I'm precocious into sexual abuse. I mean, but intense romance and people going off in rescues and all this. And I would enter the world of the dolls every day, dissociate, and stay intently and intensely in that world. And it was to such a degree that the outside world was secondary to me. It was unreal. That was the unreal world, these sort of monster, those old Japanese monster films where they sort of superimpose people running, and then these ridiculous King Kong. That's what my parents looked like. They were gigantic and monstrous and unreal, kind of lumbering across my landscape. But my world was the dolls. And in the doll world, evil was punished and good people prevailed. In my family of birth, the perpetrator won everything all the time. He was a a man of tremendous wealth and resources, and the community thought he was God. He was a wife beater, a perpetrator. He was depraved. So the dollhouse world kept me ethical and sane, because there was a place I could go where things worked out the way they should. And it was a matriarchate. There was no God the Father, no Pope, no judge, no head of the family. Queen Ginny was wonderful. She was this little white blonde goddess, but it was the world I needed to live in. It was the world that made sense to me. It was a world where I could be moral and upright, because growing up in my family, I would be Donald Trump today if I took in the lessons of that. Like, it's dog eat dog, so get on it before they get you. So this was a beautiful world, and it was, and I was scripting, I was playwriting, and not really even realizing this is actually theater that I'm doing. So I believe it saved me in childhood. I compare myself to my brother, who's perpetrator identified today, and I have nothing to do with him. We were both victimized, but he was not able, he had learning disabilities. He couldn't escape into the world of imagination. And I feel like that his options were awful, both of ours were, but he didn't have the escape hatch. I went into another dimension for 8 to 10 hours a day. He lived in hell, and he did become a perpetrator identified person, because that was the lessons of that world. So I feel like it saved my life. And I think then I came out as a lesbian in a world that was completely hostile, and still is, to lesbians. And so I use those same skill set. I wrote theater for an audience that didn't exist. I have a lesbian opera. Things that didn't exist, they're starting to come into being. But that kept me front and center with my community in a world that would make me see myself as marginalized, even in my own eyes. The low self-esteem that a marginalized person can really upload. So, yeah, saved my life.
It's fantastic. Thank you for sharing so openly too about your experience and your just everything you've gone through. It is, the value of hearing our own stories for people who haven't yet been able to listen to the story inside themselves. When we can see someone else talking about it, there's so much healing and so much power in that. So thank you for doing that for yourself, of course, but also for everyone else who needs that story. I think we've been talking a little bit about women giving ourselves permission. And I find a lot of women holding their stories inside and not giving themselves permission to share, of course, because we do face huge repercussions for living the stories that many of us have lived, but also because we are worried that our story isn't real enough, or it isn't good enough, or it's too real or too hard, or whatever. It's so important that when one person can tell her story, it opens up the avenue for 15 other women to tell their story as well.
Well, I came out as a lesbian in the 80s, and in the mid 80s, there was a movement of incest survivors. There was a huge backlash within 5 years where these powerful male perpetrators began to file lawsuits against their daughters' therapists for libel or planting whatever faults, the false memory syndrome thing. And then publishers were getting sued. So you could look in the writer's resource books, and the publishers say what they're looking for: biography, autobiography, memoir, no incest memoirs. They started to literally say that.
Wow.
Which indicates they were getting a lot of them, but also that their legal department was like, we don't want to deal with this. So, but it was a short window, and I'm so grateful, because I don't know that I would have been able to retrieve my memories in the current culture. Maybe with Me Too I could, but I was so grateful for that movement of incest survivors. It was really, that was really important for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Let's dive into the standard questions.
Yeah.
We've just been chatting, and it's such a fantastic. And you have notes. Oh, I'm so excited.
No, I thought it was so brilliant, because I usually do it on my computer. I'm like, no, you're on a podcast. You won't be able to use the computer. So it was that was for me, that was a pretty high tech.
Doing the handwriting. I also have started handwriting a journal every morning instead of, because I often will type. And I find it to be such a different mode of thought that I'm able to like pull things out of my brain when I'm handwriting that don't come out necessarily when I'm typing. So whatever that is, I don't know. Okay, so these are the questions that I'm planning to ask every guest, just to keep us kind of on the theme of theater and skills of theater and how they change our life. My cat is biting my toes. Give me 1 second. I'm going to throw her out of the room.
Oh, let's see her. Let's hold her up. I want to see her.
I need to catch her. Hold on. First, I have to catch her. This is Zuby. I love her. Okay, get out.
Oh, she's a cutie pie.
She is. She has about half an hour in her of being quiet while I'm doing things, and then she like goes nuts. Okay, so here we go. Question number 1. First of all, let me make sure I didn't even start with these basic things. It's Carolyn. That's correct. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's Carolyn Gage. And pronouns that you prefer?
She, her, hers.
Great. Just always want to double check. Your audio sounds good. Okay. So how did you get started in the theater? You talked already about
the dollhouse,
the make-believe, the dollhouse, but take us through the journey of how you actually got yourself into a place that has a stage and an audience.
Well, in 1970, I started college, and I was at William and Mary, and the head of the department started asking me to go out with him. And I didn't remember my incest. But of course, that triggered enormous PTSD that I had no understanding. I just assumed the situation was as dangerous as I was registering. Mm-hmm. And I ended up dropping out of college for 10 years. And that's why when people, like they treat harassment like it's minor, but when you're getting some young adult away from home for the first time, and her history is one of child sexual abuse, you don't have to say a whole lot. I mean, he didn't put his hand on my leg. He was asking me to go out on dates. That's what he was asking. Mm-hmm. But I knew from that moment on, I wasn't going to have a normal student's experience in that department for the next 4 years. So I dropped out, and I just did other things. And I also was a little bit gender dysphoric. And what I did in those 10 years, I just kind of dressed like a man. I hitchhiked around the country a lot. I was kind of that first wave of the women's movement. I learned how to tune up a car, and I built a house with a chainsaw, and I needed to kind of break out of the Southern Belle thing that I'd been raised with. And I went back to school when I was 30, and I went back to theater. And by then I didn't feel like calling my professors yes sir and no ma'am. And I was an adult. I'd had an adult life, and I'd had a belly full of what men are about. If you I love it when people are like, there's really no difference between men and women. And I'm like, really? Have you ever hitchhiked 10,000 miles? Because I'll tell you the difference. And then people say, what's the difference? I'm like, well, when a woman picked me up, I could go to sleep and back. I could tell them where I was going. And I always accepted anything they wanted to give me to eat or to drink or whatever. If a man picked me up, I always lied about when I was getting off. Always. I never told them where I was going because I might need to get out sooner. Never fell asleep, not even sitting up, not even napping. I was always on red alert because God knows where you end up if you do that. And if they offered me anything, I never touched it. Money, food, drink, it was like night and day. It's like, well, the difference, one is an ally, the other's an enemy that easily can kill you. If you're wearing a sign, you won't be accountable for anything you do to this person. Which is when you're hitchhiking, that's the sign you're carrying. No one knows where I am or who I am, and you can do anything you want. And I always had weapons, of course, but, so I was kind of like, that's not that different from other women's experience in the work world or with their husbands, but it's very stark if you're prostituted or you're hitchhiking. It's extremely clear. And women would introduce their feminist boyfriend to me, and you learn to read men fast when you travel like that. And I would meet their wonderful feminist husband, and it's like within 2 seconds, it's like I wouldn't get in his car. I would show my knife in the opening 2 minutes. It's like, it was like, he may never be dangerous to her, and so she doesn't have to see it. But I just, you see the world differently. So when I went back to school after that, at 30, I had a very good idea of who I was and what I wanted to do. And so I I got a bachelor's and a master's in theater, and then I was in a big whistleblower lawsuit against the University of Oregon, and that opened my eyes to a whole lot of institutional stuff.
Mhm.
And I just left. It's like, I'm going to do nothing, but I'm not going to work with men ever again. And I'm just going to do the strongest story I know how to tell, the most dangerous story I know how to tell. And I knew that meant, well, then you're going to have to produce it, probably perform in it, and you're going to have to back the whole thing yourself. And I was kind of like, yep, I can do that. And my theater degree, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of producing of my own work, and I was acting, directing, and writing. So I got out like a kind of jack of all trades. It's like, I can do all of that. I can do that. So that was
I'm wondering, because I have talked to a lot of women about this exact thing where they say, I have the story that I'm ready to tell. I know the world needs to hear it. And they haven't quite made the leap to, I'm able to make it happen. I'm able to produce it myself. I'm able to perform it. Like, if I have to, can do anything. They still are waiting for that permission. So how did you take that step from going, I have the story, into, I'll just be the one to make it happen? How did you keep yourself?
I mean, a lot of things were, I was thrown out of my church. I estranged from my family. I was fired multiple times from the public schools because I was not willing to stay closeted.
I was a teacher for 11 years, and I'm just laughing because I'm deep in the public school system. I can see it all happening very clearly.
There's a certain point. Fannie Lou Hamer, was a freedom fighter in the South, and they beat her. She was jailed and beaten very badly, and she said something to the effect of like, well, they should have just killed me because it's like they did everything they could and I'm still here, and sort of how dangerous she was. And I couldn't stand in her shoes because I didn't have that experience, but I did feel like fired, evicted, excommunicated, disinherited. It's kind of like, I think honestly I was fueled more by just kind of a wild, reckless anger. It was like I kind of I had one weapon, and that was my truth. And it was like, well, and like I say, I had amassed those skills while I was in graduate school. I wasn't conscious at the time I was going to be producing all my own work, but on some level I must have known that. I wanted the control. I wanted to know how to do all of those things. And so I had been independently producing. I independently produced about 4 shows while I was in graduate school. So when I left, and then I got hired, I think I was hired by some community theaters, and just to make money. But then I only did that for like 2 years, I think. And then it was like, okay, I changed my name. I was Carolyn Gage, and the whole thing started, so.
That's fantastic. It's kind of what I see happen a lot is the synchronicity of, I did this thing when I was a kid. I did this thing in adolescence. I learned how to do this thing. I learned how to do this thing in seemingly disconnected ways. And then when you get to a point where you're ready to really start kind of following your calling, you find that all of those skills and all of those things that you've taught yourself to do are exactly what you need to know in order to make the thing happen that you're supposed to be making happen. Would love seeing that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so give us a snapshot of what you're doing today.
Today, 3 years ago, I moved onto an island, Mount Desert Island in Maine. Wow. I know, yay.
That's like my dream come true. That's amazing.
Well, there's a lot, there's a lot that doesn't happen. I'm in a village of 2,000, so I am semi-retired. I don't perform, direct, or produce anymore, but I am writing better than I've ever written. I'm writing quite a bit and loving it. So that's what I'm doing. I do a little bit of lecturing, and I will workshop a play because it's sort of the last stage of writing. But I do feel that disconnect. I used to live down in Portland, where I was Boston was 2 hours away. New York was a 45-minute plane. I am up in Maine. Leaving the island is a big production. It's just touring. I knew when I moved here it was a commitment to not tour anymore because it's very hard to get off the island. And but
So
I'm
you were
having,
touring for over 20 years.
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
did. Yeah, I toured a lot. I did a lot of different things when I toured. Pretty much anybody who wanted me somewhere and was willing to pay for it, I would just go. Partly because, I had forfeited a teaching career, and, so anytime I could teach or perform, I would go.
Mhm.
But that's what I'm doing now.
Beautiful. So what do you think is making your writing so much better today?
Focus. I mean, I am not touring. Touring is kind of a distraction. You have to get it together. And the Joan of Arc piece was 90 minutes. So I would start rememorizing it 10 days out. And then, it's very intense and you really can't think of anything right before you do it. And then you're out and traveling, and then you have to come back and decompress. And there's 5,000 emails and all this stuff is, it just, and I'm not touring anymore. It's very focused. I get up and I have weeks of nothing ahead of me except the writing schedule. And so that's been wonderful.
Do you write every day?
Pretty much. Yeah. I have like the one that's on deck, and it's red hot right now. And then I have one that's usually in a kind of lesser stage in the background. Then I have ones that are just existing in my imagination. There's a batting order, and I can see them moving up as I finish one project and come into the next. So I always have a lot of them going on.
How do you keep yourself, and I'm using air quotes here, motivated? How do you keep yourself motivated to continue writing, even though you're semi-retired?
I think that, I censored myself for 30 years. I see my entire culture censored all around me. I think I get such a rush of endorphins to get that thing out. I think it's in the something or other gospels. They're not the regular gospels, the ones that the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there's a saying, if you take that which is in you and you put it out, it will save your life. If you keep it in, it will destroy it. That is graphic. The Gospels of something, or the something anyway. I wish I could remember what they were. I'm not.
We'll look it up. We'll add it to the show notes for podcast listeners.
It's a fabulous quotation, and it's really true. And when you get to be 67, you see the people destroyed, especially the incest survivors that didn't get the story out. It will just destroy you. And so anyway, so that keeps me going, because I'm always telling a radical story, and I have I'm just going to get such relief if I can get it out.
Yeah, it's like a survival instinct in a way.
Yes. Yeah. No, there's a tremendous incentive. And then given that my work, I knew when I started, it might never be produced in my lifetime, because it was all not just lesbian centric, but survivor centric, and often lesbian butch centric. And I'm like, well, you're probably never going to see it produced. So it had to satisfy me thoroughly just to get it out in the best possible form. That had to be the reward. Because if I was all like, oh, no, nobody's buying it, I'm going to kill myself. It's like, well, that's going to be the world's shortest career. So, but I do get a lot of reward just from getting it out. And that keeps me going. But I have very good discipline, too. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm so fortunate that I recovered my memories and that I'm still alive. And I really actually literally feel the pressure of all the women who died before me in eras when there was no women's movement, no lesbian movement, died at their own hand or thought they made up the incest or went crazy. I feel I had a good education. I have the chops to tell that story and tell it well and powerfully. And I feel a real mandate to do that. It's like I got out, and I need to tell the world about the ones that didn't. I really feel a certain survivor guilt, I guess, around it. That really fuels me a huge amount. Yeah, for sure.
That's beautiful. I especially like what you said about, of course, now it's out of my brain because I'm thinking about the survivor thing. I'll come back to it if it comes up. That happens. Okay, so let's move forward with the questions. Tell us about a vivid memory that you have of the theater. I was gonna phrase this question like your most impactful memory, but I think that like if there's a memory that's really vivid for you, we want to hear it. And
I'm going to tell you, it's a theater memory from the theater career, but it actually is a radio memory.
Oh.
And I was on To the Best of Our Knowledge, which is an Public Radio International, it's PRI show, kind of like All Things Considered. So I was on The Best of Our Knowledge, and they were asking me about the second coming of Joan of Arc. So I talked a little bit about it, and then I did a 15-minute excerpt or something from it on the radio, performing it. So I get this email from this woman, and she said, well, I was driving in my car when that program came on, and she just was really wanting to hear it. But she said I had just pulled into my driveway, and my 3-year-old was next to me, and she was getting fussy. So I took her out of the car and was walking her up and down the driveway, and I turned the radio way up so I could keep hearing, the broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I was a little nervous because you kept saying the word lesbian, and I had turned it way up, and I was worried about what the neighbors were going to think, So here's this woman walking up and down with her 3-year-old who's fussing, and she's trying to catch this whole broadcast. And then she said, and then the show was over, and I put my daughter back in the car, and we drove to another state. And she left her husband and came out as a lesbian. So in the course of my 30-minute interview, she went from what will the neighbors think? That woman, I'm not that powerful. She was at a tipping point. She didn't need a whole lot, but she needed something. And that something was in my play. And it was enough.
Wow. I love that. That is something, so I work primarily as a life coach, and I have all of these messages in my brain, and I sometimes find it difficult or intimidating or whatever, the permission, there's all sorts of things going into it, to share the thought that I have today, to share the message, to, put out the inspiration. And the thing that drives me often is kind of that same idea of there's one person out there. There's one person who needs to hear something today. There's one person who needs, one molecule of light. Light doesn't come in molecules, but you know what I mean? So that often I find can be the driving force for me. And I love that your vivid memory is of just having
and in the context,
one person.
4 million people heard that broadcast. So I sat back and waited for all the massive, my career was going to be made because I knew it was a good broadcast. And I thought, well, I'm just going to get so many production off. My life will change. It'll be pre-PRI and post. That didn't happen. The silence was deafening. And I thought, I must be completely delusional. I must think that I'm doing something important and I'm not. But that email came in. And there's a connection between the fact this woman's entire life changed from that 30-minute interview and the fact that 3,999,000, et cetera, people didn't have any response to it at all. And I thought they couldn't hear it. They turned it off. They couldn't hear it. They forgot it. As they were hearing it, they were editing it out. That because that woman validated for me, yes, I am doing what I think I'm doing, and I'm doing it well. And what happened to the other 3 million, whatever, that, I never heard from is, of course, of course the silence is deafening. It's too dangerous. It's ahead of its time. It's expensive to listen to my plays. It's expensive. It might cost you your job, your husband, your comfortable income, your sexual orientation. So to me, it was a very precious email because I loved her story, but also it explained why that wasn't this huge moment where I was discovered by the world.
And there's probably also, she's probably the one vocal person out of many who were impacted, who just didn't feel the desire or the whatever, or the permission to reach out and actually talk to you about it. She was at the tipping point, but there may have been someone who was just ready for the seed to be planted, and it won't be for years and years until they're at that point, that's so beautiful.
Well, that's my favorite, I think.
That's a fantastic memory. All right. What is the most important lesson that you have learned from your work?
I wrote it down.
Yay!
And it actually is a quotation that the lesbian actor Ava Le Gallienne had written in one of her journals, and I had run across it earlier. It's from Charlotte Cushman, who was a big, fat lesbian butch performer in the 19th century. She was the most popular actress in the English-speaking world, that's 2 continents, for 40 years, which is amazing longevity for a woman in theater.
Mm-hmm.
She was a powerhouse, but she got written out of history because she was very public with her relationships with women. And she was fat, and she was butch, and she made a lot of her greatest roles were playing men's roles. So whoever writes theater history was kind of like, let's talk about Sarah Bernhardt and Eleanor Duse and, you know, women who had lots of boyfriends and things. But this is what she said. She said, art is an absolute mistress. She will not be coquetted with or slighted. She requires the most entire self-devotion, and she repays with grand triumphs. And that's really what you have to remember. If you are an artist, you will serve your art. You know, it will not serve you. It's not a hobby. You will serve your art. It will take you places that were the last place you ever wanted to go. It will cost you everything. Usually it's a lot of financial sacrifice involved. And then it demands that. And if you try to fool around with it or be half-assed or make concessions for the sake of box office, you will pay more than you can ever know. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's a sacred art. It always was. And, you know, I don't know why we treat it as profane. And you can pretend it's not a sacred art, but I'm telling you, you will pay for it. Just like Mickey Mouse and the Sorcerer's Apprentice. You are dealing with magic.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're doing. You better do what it tells you because you're going to be in trouble.
So how do you do that? How do you listen and like do the right thing? I'm using air quotes again. How do you do the right thing in the face of that power?
I think you keep the channel open all the time. And it's just like when you are writing a scene and you kind of have an idea where you want it to go. And so you kind of made the character say something that they wouldn't say. And you go back and you look at it like, or it wakes you up in the middle of the night like, no, you know, I don't know what it is, but it isn't that, you know. It's like when some famous sculptor said, it's very easy. You just chip away anything that isn't the statue. They can't really tell you what it is, but they know what it isn't. And I know that scene isn't working. I'm not sure what it needs, but I know it's not working. So I'm not stopping. I'm going to keep listening. I'll try this. That doesn't work either. All right. Knowing what doesn't work is really kind of the key to the whole thing. But the second part of it's important. She repays with grand triumphs. Yeah. They may seem delayed. My grand triumphs have been quiet. My grand triumph was that little email I just told you about, you know. I think you need to have the faith that serving art, there's days where it's like, what? This is just an abusive relationship. That's all this is. But it's not. You're building character. I think as you practice your art at the highest level, you meet more and more wonderful people. You know, the air gets kind of rarefied. There are not so many of you around, but the ones that are still up there at that altitude are master climbers. That is an awesome thing. Yeah. It really does. It is an absolute mistress, but it repays munificently, as Eva Le Gallienne would say. So you have to remember both those things at the same time. But yeah, if you don't think you're there to serve, do something else. I don't know. Write a movie.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's
design corporate logos and write for movies.
Yeah, I think of it in a similar way to how I used to think of teaching, which is that it's too hard to do unless it's the only thing you can keep doing.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. People like, do you think I should make it? It's like, if you can do anything other than theater, for God's sake, do it. Because you will end up when the going gets tough, you will end up doing it.
Yep.
So I burned a lot of bridges with the incest thing, but then being an out lesbian in the 80s, it was like, well, there go all the rest of the bridges, and I didn't even have to light the match. So, I mean, and at the time it was terrifying, but now it's like, that was the only thing left, and I'm grateful now. But at the time it was like, I don't have any fault. There's no plan B. But my experience with artists is you make a good plan B because you're going to have to use it. But if you don't have one at all, you will, you might actually learn how to fly. It's like,
yeah. Oh, that's so powerful.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, plan B, Plan B can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
Most of the people I know had a plan B or live in plan B now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Whew. That's a lot to take in. I'm actually going to have to probably journal on that.
it
To
might
really
destroy
think
you as a
it.
life coach, because I mean the
Yeah.
thing is, it's like women need to feel safe and secure, and they need to have a not crazy ass plan, or they'll end up destitute or whatever. But I do think we're tribal people, and that when you are called to be an artist, if we were tribal, you would be a shaman, and people would understand they needed to leave pots of yams at your tent door. We don't
I
support
want people to
ourselves.
leave me pots of yams. That sounds great.
No, we don't recognize the sacred. We don't recognize that's a calling. That's hard work. That's hard as tilling the field. It's sort of like, well, you do that on the side, but the rest of us have to go hunting, so you have to go hunting too. It's kind of like, actually, when you're called to be shamanistic, that's the work. And an evolved culture will support it and recognize the whole tribe needs someone who can devote themselves to that, because you're giving us the narratives that help us keep going.
Yeah.
This whole commercialization of art is terrible, because it gives you narratives that are soul sucking instead of but it's a calling for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so what are some skills or habits of mind that have been most valuable to you as an artist or craftsperson? You're both. You got your fingers in a little bit of everything.
I'd say do a little art every day.
Yes.
Even if it's bad, and even if it's 10 minutes, do a little art every day. And this is critical, really critical. Finish everything you start. And if halfway through you realize it's a piece of shit, or that you have badly misconceived it, that the premise of it doesn't hold up, make yourself finish it. You will learn so much doing that. And secondly, you'll never do that again. It's sort of like, if you realize your foundation sucks, you make yourself build the rest of the house. You will never, ever have a foundation like that again. You'll be like, oh God, no, never again. I felt like that was critical. I finished everything I started. And it makes you think hard when you start a project. All right, this is about a 2-year project. I know that I'm going to make myself finish it. Can I live with this for 2 years? Is this a robust enough idea for me to follow through on? That was magic. I heard that from a television screenwriter way back in around 1980, and I never forgot it. And I have made myself finish projects that were really bad. And you learn a lot. Otherwise, you get up to a hurdle and just do something. You never clear that hurdle. You learn so much from the mistakes.
I have never heard that stated in that way before. I've never heard that advice, but it makes so much sense to just keep going and finish, even if the end product is terrible, even if like you said, halfway through that it's going to be terrible, because the lesson of it is so valuable. That is like a really beautiful, mind-blowing idea for me right now, because I've never heard that. No one's ever talked about finishing that way.
I feel like that these projects will release you. You'll feel it, it's like you get released from it, but it's sort of like, it's like showing up for a job. You've got this muse or whatever that you're in relationship with. It. I always feel like my projects are handed to me. Like, this is what you're going to write about. And you just show up faithfully. And one day they're kind of like, okay, you know what? You can go home now. That it releases you, but you keep showing up for it. I think that's true with everything in life, even relationships. Hopefully, if they're abusive, you realize, I'm released from this, whatever it was, I'm released from it, like, immediately. They did that. It's like, oh, there it goes. I'm out. But you're in relationship, you're in a contractual relationship spiritually with everything around you. So I do feel like going through life with this sort of self-will driven, I don't feel like doing this anymore. Like, oh, this isn't any fun. I don't know. I think it's better to wait for the sense of release on the contract. I've done everything that I can here now. I think I'm done. That's everything I've got for this.
Yeah. If nothing else, what an immensely more fulfilling way to move forward. Because then you move through your life knowing I did as much as I could on this and this and this, and not I
Yeah.
stopped, right? Or I
Yeah.
walked away.
Well, and that can become addictive. And I did that earlier because I always watched my mother, and I thought, boy, when I'm an adult, I'm just the power of walking away. Yeah. And those 10 years of living out of a backpack, because you said something I didn't like. Oh, I'm just going to get my backpack and I'm on the freeway and you're never going to hear from me again. And that was so liberating, but it became addictive. And I actually had to work to stop doing that, and to realize you have more business here. You've got options here. You've got power in this situation. Getting your feelings hurt and being violated are actually completely different things.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. You hurt my feelings, I'm gone. It's like, no, now I confront. We work with this. I mean, just so many things about that. So maybe for women on another path, pulling the plug is their spiritual discipline. But for me, that one I overdid. So the sticking with it until it releases you is kind of what my spiritual path is now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving my best.
And
But
how do you know when it's releasing you? What would you say to someone who's just starting out on an artistic journey about how she could know that it's time?
You finish it.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it goes to Broadway. It means it has a second or third act. If it's a 2 or 3 act play, you finish it. You don't write the first act and say, oh, I can imagine the second and it sucks. I'm done. And also making yourself do that, what it does is it disables the inner critic. Because I'll get up and I'll be, I can see this one act is awful and I'm writing about a subject I don't know enough about, and blah, blah, blah. But it becomes irrelevant. It's like, well, yeah, I hear that, but you do know you have to finish it because that's our deal. And then you finish it, it's one of the best plays you ever wrote.
Mm.
So I think there's never been a play that I wasn't convinced was absolute garbage at some point. None of my plays. There's always a point where I'm like, okay, the veil have fallen from my eyes. My delusions of grandeur are gone. This is worthless. You write through it. Like, nevertheless, I got to finish it. And then I'm like, God, that's an amazing play. So I think that's a little tool to defang that critic. It's like, yeah, you're right. It is garbage. Now, let's get that second act done, Yeah. And it loses the ability to shatter your self-confidence. Self-confidence becomes irrelevant.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I am confident I will finish what I start. That's the only thing I'm confident about. Maybe a piece of shit, it may be a work of genius, but I am confident because this is who I am. I will finish it. Yeah.
That in itself is incredibly liberating. Because then you don't have to be judging. You don't have to be critiquing as you move through the process. You just do. You get to just be the artist.
Yeah, and if you're life coaching somebody who's on that point of giving up and you're like, no, we'll try finishing everything. And she's just convinced about that, maybe she's right. It's worthless. And she spends another 3 weeks on it. That's just frustrating. And look, it was mediocre then. It still is. It's like, what are you going to do next time? Next time
Mm-hmm.
she will spend a little more time vetting the original concept, you will come away with rewards for that. Mm-hmm. They may not be the ones that you thought, but no, that was I think the most powerful tool in my box was to finish everything.
Huge. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, what is one thing that you do in your theatrical artistic work that if everyone applied that principle to their lives, they would have a better life? That's a hard question.
No, it's easy. I got.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Everyone needs to be faithful to their gifts. Way above wife, partner, husband, dog, puppy, baby. Be faithful. What you are given, if it's kindness, if it's love of animals, if it's you love to cook, everyone has their gifts. Take them seriously and be faithful to them. Don't disparage them. Don't starve them. Don't put them last place. Don't rank them below something someone else can do. Just be really faithful, like really study up on what the word faithful means. And I feel like that is just, then you're not going to be vicious and mean and petty and competitive and looking for the grass is greener, that emptiness in your soul, you're holding your loved one back because you're competitive with them, or living through your child so that they will live your dreams. You know, if you're faithful to your gifts, you're going to be able to be safe and accountable in your relationships. And that's really important.
That is really important. I love that word safe too. That word safe is a bedrock for me, that I make a lot of choices based on being safe, not like emotionally safe, but like I know that my security has to come first so that I can jump off the cliff.
If you're not faithful to your gifts, you're going to need things that you don't want. And if you've ever partnered somebody who needed you but didn't really want you, but they needed you, it's a nightmare. Yes. Or
I was engaged to that person.
or if you're not faithful to your gifts, you're going to want stuff that you don't need, like an addict. Mm-hmm. Fill up the hole, but you don't need any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Either one of those things will ruin your life. If you're faithful to your gifts, well, that's where if you're dating somebody, watch them. Are they faithful to their gifts? Because then they're not going to be. And that person who needs you desperately but doesn't really want you is very romantic, very, don't be hard on yourself if you fall for it. Need is incredible. It's, oh my God, I'm a goddess in their world. Uh-huh. They don't really want you, but they just need you. But I mean, it's easy to be fooled by that. But if you paid attention, I bet if you thought about this person, were they really, had they even recognized what their gifts were, and were they faithful to it?
Nope.
Bingo.
That's
the biggest red flag.
Bottle that up and like give it to everyone in the world. That is such an incredibly powerful idea. You're just a font, Carolyn.
I have suffered.
And you're using that to share light, though. You've turned it into beautiful learning, and you're sharing it all the time, which is, not everyone does that. Not everyone takes their suffering and makes it useful.
Well, thank you. I needed to hear that today. This is good.
Well, there you go. There's my gift for you. All right. Should theater be required life curriculum?
Yes. I remember reading somewhere that, you know, if you watch little puppies, they play fierce animal, you know, or they attack the little piece of newspaper. Like animals play. I mean, like the impulse towards the dramatic is how we grow up. That's how the puppy learns to be a watchdog, you know, like that it's practicing for life. And, you know, we don't walk out in front of the audience with unrehearsed material unless we're suicidal or something. But we go through life. We show up in life with unrehearsed material every freaking day and wonder why it didn't play well. Mm. You know, and I feel like, you know, theater is, I think that it keeps people civilized. It gives us an outlet for our rage. And I taught briefly in the prisons, the theater program. You know, we're all kind of imprisoned by our egos and the context of our lives and our age or what the world tells us about our sex, you know, women can do this and blah, blah. And I think that, you know, theater, it gives you an escape. You can go away and be somebody else. And then when you come back, you're inhabiting your own character a little more loosely. It's, you know, you don't take yourself so seriously. It's like, well, I was Juliet all afternoon and I'll be Joan of Arc tomorrow. And, you know, and this is Carolyn Gage and she's just one of many, you know. So I think, I mean, and they say studies have been done about the effects of sports programs in high schools for team building and self-esteem and blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Theater rates higher every time over sports. I don't know why sports gets all the freaking funding. Because if you're talking about building character and skill sets and, you know, it's theater is the golden ticket, not sports. I think sports can be very crushing for a lot of kids.
Completely agree. I think that there are, I mean, we could spend hours just talking about this. I think that sports have benefits and that it is a great fit for some kids.
Yeah.
But I also think that theater has the same benefits and more, and is a great fit for an even wider chunk of the population.
Yeah.
Because it's so varied in the abilities. In sports, you kind of have to have some coordination and speed and strength, and you need to be connected to your body. But in theater, you can be missing all of that and still be incredibly successful and learn and get better at all of those other things too. So again, we could talk about that for hours. I'm a huge advocate for theater and education. So I've got many thoughts.
Well, and you know what part of it is, you know, that's what I was going to do for a living. But, you know, those poor people who are directing the theater program in a high school, and they're paid kind of like, I think they're paid like coaches or something, that it doesn't take into account they're doing 10 times the work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the work is just massive. And then, of course, it's a labor of love. So you're going to be up at midnight hot gluing the costume. You don't get paid for that. You know, and they get people who love theater. So they're basically donating a huge amount of their time, but it's not a professional situation then. You know, it needs to be fully funded with a full recognition.
Mm-hmm.
I remember even that in college, you know, like you get in a show and you get some college credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like 1 college credit for being in a show. I'm like, let me just tally the hours that went into that, you know, like, yeah. So,
yeah. And then compare that to a regular course, no competition. Okay. Plant a seed for us in our hearts, our minds, our spirits. What do you want to start in the people who are listening?
well, I think it's really important that everybody be who they are. And I fought so hard for that because I didn't have my memories till I was 33.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to know who you are and then be who you are. And that to understand that the alternative is really not an alternative. If you're trying to be somebody that you're not, you know, if you're doing something because it's what your family expects of you or whatever, you're not present in your own life. It's not like another way of being. It's a way of not being. You are either being who you are or you're in a state of dissociation. You're not present in your own life. And Charlotte Bronte asks her question, how can I live without my life? And that's just a nonsensical question. How can I live without my life? You can't. And yet millions of people are trying to do just that every day when it's just so self-evident. That's a nonsense question. How can I breathe without breathing? How can I live without my life? You can't. And so first get that, really, you can't. You have to be who you are. And the second part is, if you realize that's not supported by your environment, because you're in a marginalized personality with regard to the mainstream or mainstream theater or whatever, then go and do theater that puts you and your tribe front and center. You can inhabit a world where your issues, the things that are important to you, your values and your identity are front and center. Mm-hmm. You might have to create it or co-create it with others, but you can find a way to live that. So all of this is kind of hard. You have to be who you are, but that's not negotiable. Just understand that whatever you think you're doing, when you're saying things you don't mean, appearing like somebody you're not doing shit. You're not being you. You're either being you or you're not. So it's a complete binary. So you have to be who you are. And then, you know, that becomes bearable through theater because you can create that world where you can be visible to yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's terribly important, to be visible to yourself. So that's kind of what I want to say to people.
Thank you for flipping that too, because I think there are a lot of conversations happening about living your authentic life and being your best self and knowing yourself, but we don't often think about how the other side isn't viable. It's not actually an option to not.
It's nothing.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, it's not optional. It's not optional to learn who you are. It's not optional to be authentic. It's literally the only choice. It has to be.
Otherwise, I know, like, you know, people think it's like croquet. It's sort of, it didn't hit the wicket, but it's closer now, and it might get hit by something, or you might hit it next. No, life is horseshoes. You hit the ringer, or it's nothing. It's you might as well have thrown it over the fence. If it's an inch away from it, it doesn't matter. It only counts if you're right on the post. It isn't croquet, it's horseshoes. And you're either being you or you're not, or you're nothing. It won't count for anything. I mean, what does it mean to be an incredibly world famous success? We have one in the White House who's completely not present, utterly not present, just completely dissociated values. Mm-hmm. Is that success? I mean, what does it mean to be, you're a huge success in failure?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
And if you take that, let's call it like a regular person, someone who's not necessarily world famous, but someone who's living a life that isn't theirs, the level of chaos and damage and backwards movement that's happening from the person currently in the White House is just done on a smaller scale, I think, when we are living dissociated from who we are. Which then for me is like extra motivating to really like know myself and live authentically, because I don't want to create that chaos. Chaos, some level of chaos is good and can be artistic, but I don't want to just be a force of what's sort of like entropy. I don't want to be damaging. I don't want it to be backwards. I don't want to be creating nothing. So it's up to me to make sure that I'm living in alignment with myself, because otherwise I'm just hurting.
But one of the things that I notice as a writer is, like, it's very difficult to operate, out of concepts or ways of framing things if you have no language for it. And in the world of oppression, I mean, there's a lot of words for what happened to lesbians in my generation: firing, eviction, threats, harassment, lower pay, stress, sadness, loss. All these things were very real, and that's why a lot of women stayed in the closet or didn't even let themselves know they were lesbian. And I can't really, I don't know what the words are for that thing when you come home to yourself. There's an exhilaration. You go off the battery and into the socket. It's like there's endless energy now. I didn't have to have the battery. But I don't have language for it. Mm-hmm. If I did, I think everybody would realize I have to be authentic. This is just, I like the word feral or wild or connected with so many things on the planet, because you don't connect well when you're dissociated. Mm-hmm. You connect with other dissociated beings, which would explain the Trump cabinet, Ben Carson, people that are not even members of their own tribe, like what? Traitors to their gender, anyway. So, but I think it's important to look at that is, that there's really no language for the overwhelming benefits that come from being authentic. And if it's marginalized, we've got such a huge vocabulary. Oh, but God's sake, if you're lesbian, there's a whole checklist. But oh my God, if you come out with your authentic sexual orientation, your sex is going to be wild and juicy. You're going to be energized every morning. You're going to find your tribe, and it's going to be, there just should be, someone should have a convention and just draft
and create the words.
And I think there's feelings involved that haven't even been identified. I'm thinking of I think it was very radical when Alice Walker said, resistance is the secret of joy. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, anytime you become authentic, you're going to encounter resistance. You're going to have to live to a certain degree in resistance to expectations and mainstream and this and that. And that's the juice. That's the joy. It's the secret of joy. So, I think that we're linguistically controlled. It's part of the colonization of the imagination, is that we don't have the words that would incentivize us to become authentic.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a word that white men use that we could steal or adjust.
Well, it's full of perks. I know that. you know, it's just, it's so visible what they do to women, especially, you know, that have that kind of authenticity. It's very visible. Usually it's done intentionally, visibly, as a lesson to everybody. Don't do what she did. It's a witch burning is alive and well. And they're going to do that to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah.
And I kind of dread it, but I'm also curious how she's going to meet it. I don't know if she has enough support, but I think that, yeah, we need to see, we just need to see that joy, and that you do attract support. I feel like sometimes I just attract support from the molecules in the air for being true to myself.
Absolutely. I have little guys out in the universe. They're kind of like the minions in Despicable Me. And when I need something, I literally well, it's not literally, it's metaphorically. I imagine sort of peeling open my head.
Yes.
And like removing the boundary and then just talking to my little universe guys. And then they're like, oh, yay. And they like run off and do things for me. That's what it is in my head, which is possibly nuts, but that's what happens. So
and I've seen those miracles in theater over and over. You're someplace where you know there's no samovar within 10,000 miles, but suddenly you're doing Chekhov. And there was, oh, you know, my next door neighbor just brought a samovar home from the flea market yesterday. It's like, no.
It happens all the time.
All the time in theater, all the time.
So beautiful. So Carolyn, I want to ask one question that is maybe a hard question. It's not on my list because it's specific to you. I am wondering if you have been called a man-hater and how you respond to that. Because we've had, you know, we're talking about feminism and we're talking about men and, you know, the patriarchy, and we haven't said very many positive things about men.
Well, this is, I mean, this is part of the colonization of the imagination that I was talking about. And in the 1930s, we knew that, you know, Germans who felt like their Jewish neighbors should actually be able to, you know, not be hauled off to a camp, murdered, and have all their property stolen. If you believe that, you are a Jewish sympathizer. It's not like if you thought that should happen to them, you know, that was normalized. That was being a good citizen. I mean, it was upside down logic. It's like, I'm just being a human being. I'm just kind of being a pretty mediocre neighbor. That's just obvious. They have rights. No, that's suddenly this weird, suspicious, unpatriotic Jewish sympathizer. And then people would scramble to prove they're not. No, I mean, I'm not. I just was wondering why you came at midnight with guns and hauled them all out of their beds, you know. But I'm not a Jewish sympathizer. No, I mean, it's a colonization. And I grew up in the South in the 50s. And if you thought that, you know, lynching was wrong, or that people of color should be able to have access to, an education, you were an N-word lover. And again, well, no, I'm not. I'm just wondering why, you know, and so then if you're a woman and you're talking about, oh my God, the oppression of women, I can't believe we're still on the abortion thing. You know, like, men historically, globally, universally, and ongoingly are the agents of women's oppression. And I know you have a lovely father and a great son and a nice, kind landlord. Let me repeat. Men historically, globally, universally, and ongoingly are the agents of women's oppression. All men benefit from that. Not all men perpetrate it. All men are part of the system that perpetrates it. If you name that, you know, you're right in there with the Jewish sympathizer, the N-word lover, and now you're the man-hater. This is just social control techniques. It's considered normal that 1 out of 3 little girls are raped by, you know, father or a male authority figure in their life. It's just, you know, the violence against women is normal. Speaking out about it, that is the thing that gets you the label of being the man-hater. So I think it's like when people say, are you a man-hater? It's like, are you a Jewish sympathizer? I think it's important not to answer the question and to just reassert you know, the horror of what is actually being done that's normalized. I think that's, you know, when did you stop beating your partner? It's like a question that you can't answer, because it's just to answer yes or no is to accept the framework in which supporting an oppressed person is being stigmatized.
Yeah.
You know, you want to say something that will, you just need to, I learned that in interviews, like don't answer the interviewer's question, just to have 3 subjects of, go into the interview with 3 things you want to talk about, and no matter what they ask you, that's an interesting question. You know what that makes me think of? And go and just get your piece out. Because a lot of times, especially if I was doing, you know, an interview, they would be lesbian baiting. So I don't want to waste my time with those stupid questions. It's like, you know, let me tell you about my work, you know, like talk about what you want to talk about. I just think that that is a pointless question.
Yeah. And I actually see it kind of reversed in the parallel with Jewish sympathizers. It's actually kind of reversed, where it's like anyone who's not actively speaking out against the patriarchy, who's not seeing the things that are happening and at least seeing it and naming it, is more like a Nazi sympathizer.
Well, you know, this phrase started to crop up about 10 years ago, and I love it. It's a perpetrator apologist. That's what you could say. What you sound like a man hater. You sound like a perpetrator apologist, and then you start running out your statistics.
Yeah,
you realize, you know, that women still make 70 cents on the dollar. That, you know, the horrendous childcare expenses, the lack of menstrual pads in prisons, you know, the rape stats, the batterings, the #1 cause of death of women. You know, it's just like, that's what the real term is, a perpetrator apologist. And what goes into that? Are you benefiting from it, or are you in Stockholm syndrome? Like, that's the interesting question. How can anybody be normalizing patriarchy or the Nazi regime or the system of racial apartheid that was in the South in the 50s? How can that be? What does that mean to say that's a normal and desirable state of affairs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. There's the parallel. There's where it
so
really makes sense.
Call that one out. Perpetrator apologist.
Yeah. I like that. All right. Thank you so much for answering that question. I think it's just something like we need to be having these conversations. It's not theater related necessarily, but
it's so knee-jerk though. And like I say, I saw good people in my childhood scramble to not be called N-word lover.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
You know, love your neighbor. This is a horrible thing happening here. I mean, you know, we have to learn not to have a knee-jerk, like, I remember in the 80s, women would be, I'm not feminist. That is going away, thank God. It's sort of like, I don't want equal rights. I don't want to be a full human being. Don't get me wrong.
Don't pay me enough.
I am a lesser being, and let me be clear about that. I'm comfortable with it. You know, it was insane. I'd watch really powerful women throwing away but I'm not a feminist. I'm like,
why not?
Exactly. Yeah, it's starting to turn, but I think the men hater is still a little bit of a buzzword. So
yeah. Well, Carolyn Gage, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I have so many things to think about after this conversation. I'm sure that podcast listeners will as well. If someone wants to contact you, produce one of your plays, hire you, or just get to know more about your work, where can they find you?
It's www.carolyngage.com. And my whole catalog of plays is online, and you can also, I'm on Kindle. I've got 75 plays and about 12 books. Everything I've ever written is on Kindle, and also Lulu. So, and it's all cataloged on my website. So hit me up, and I'll be happy to mention this podcast. I'll send you a free PDF.
Oh, amazing. Okay. I want one. I will take you up on that. All right. Thank you so much, Carolyn Gage, for your time and your energy and your thoughts. And once again, for the work that you do in the world, that you have been doing for decades and that you continue to do even today in semi-retirement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Okay. Bye.